Hello, Waterloo Region. You're listening to Meet the Candidate on CKMS-FM 102.7 Radio Waterloo. My name is Bob Jonkman. In this episode, we meet Jeff Donkersgoed, the NDP candidate for Kitchener South Hespeler. In Meet the Candidate, Radio Waterloo provides 25 minutes of free airtime to the Waterloo Region candidates running in the Ontario provincial election. This is not an interview, but 25 minutes of unstructured time. Candidates could tell you about their party platform, the local Waterloo Region issues they'll be tackling, why they're running, or what they do outside of politics. Note that the views expressed are not necessarily those of the Waterloo Board of Directors, volunteers, sponsors, or advertisers. Now, let's meet the candidate, Jeff Donkersgoed.
Thanks, Bob. I'm really happy to be here. And actually, you've said my last name in a better Dutch accent than I can actually do. So I usually just say Donkersgoed, but I love it. It's great. Thank you so much. So yeah, my name is Jeff Donkersgoed. I am the Ontario NDP candidate for the riding of Kitchener South Hespeler. I'm going to just kind of have a loose agenda for the next 25 minutes where I'm going to talk about who I am and why I'm running. I'll talk a little bit about our platform with reference to public education, post-secondary education, maybe a little bit of what's going on down south and those implications with reference to the tariffs and cost of living, public health care, housing, and then hopefully I'll get a little bit of a chance to kind of round things off when we get to the end. So I am a public school music teacher. I am the department head of music at Glenview Park Secondary School. I've been teaching for 15 years and I've had experience teaching in the Toronto District School Board and then here in Waterloo, and basically 50-50 split. And I guess the best way to put it is that education is political. And I did not anticipate that when I began my career. My first year of teaching was when the Ontario Liberal Party introduced Bill 115, which for those of you might know, that was when our contracts were essentially legislated. And that was when I began to realize just kind of that, that worker battle that is within education. And so I became very involved with my union, the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation, and was involved in numerous different committees and activities with reference to, getting public education, properly funded. In fact, to the point where this year, prior to the election being dropped, I was actually on a secondment with provincial OSSTF, where we were working on localized campaigns. I was across southwestern Ontario, and basically mobilizing members, getting them more politically active to, put pressure on school boards and the provincial government to increase funding for education. So the activism was very much set. But I began to realize there's so much more. There's so many other issues obviously at stake. And during the pandemic, I've got two young kids who I love, made going to meetings a little bit tricky. But during the pandemic, when we were all stuck at home, it actually allowed me some flexibility to join various other groups. And the group that I did join was the Waterloo Region Labour Council. And it was through that experience where I learned about struggles of the entire working class. Think about what was going on in healthcare back in 2020. And, we were outside, banging pots and pans for our nurses and our doctors for what they were dealing with. Our grocery store workers who were, essentially risking their lives to ensure that we were well fed. Canada Post and other, delivery services who were making sure that we, had our packages. And I think it was through that experience that I'm very, very grateful for, where I realized there's so much more than just, education. And I will say this, the struggles I was seeing as a teacher, in terms of reaching our most at-risk youth, a lot of those things were because of issues they were facing outside of school. Perhaps they had parents who were working several jobs. Perhaps they had parents who were dealing with addiction. Some of them were dealing with precarious housing. And it just became realizing that instead of, complaining, it was time to act. So through various experiences, the Labour Council, learning about, other working class groups, and social justice issues too. I think one of the great things we did as a Labour Council before I started the job at provincial OSSTF was getting groups together after the pandemic. We held an Enough is Enough through the Ontario Federation of Labour Fair, where we had over 30 groups outside of City Hall here in Kitchener coming together so that they could realize their common interests and their experiences. And then, that was when Acorn Waterloo had just started. So getting a sense of some of the rental and tenant issues that were coming forward. And then the environmentalists and that whole thing with the Greenbelt, which culminated in, you might remember, the counter protest to Ford Fest, which happened at Binghamton's, which I was, just really privileged and honored to be part of, helping, organize that. And it was one of those various events that pushed back on the Greenbelt. So for me, in terms of, all these different experiences, the reason I'm running under the Ontario NDP banners is because it's the platform and the party that I just see myself as agreeing with. They stand for, and support a mixed economy, broader welfare, and, more taxation of rich corporations. They stand up for 2S LGBTQIA plus rights, anti-racism, electoral reform, environmental stewardship, and they want to invest in public infrastructure such as healthcare and education. So that's sort of the lowdown of why I'm running for the NDP, because it's just the party to me that best encapsulates my beliefs and values and what I hope to bring when I get to Queen's Park. So now I'm going to I'll go to my strength, which is public education. And, it's been, 15 years where, I think I've always been 15 years as a teacher, but then I was always a student as well. And I've got 2 children in the system. And so there's a personal investment in having to do things with this. But I've seen firsthand how we've got, successive provincial governments, not just the current Ford Conservative government, even the Liberals as well. They started well investing in public education, and then Bill 115 came about. But I've seen how it's shortchanged students in public education. So since the 2018-19 school year, poor pupil funding in education has grown only 20%, has increased by only 15%. Inflation has grown 20%, but yet government revenues have grown by 36%. In fact, we do have, record government revenues happening. But we've got a shortchanging happening. And Ricardo Tranjan of the Canadian Centre for Policy and Alternatives has notes that Ontario is spending $1,500 less per student than it did in 2018-19. And I will tell you, education workers, and I'm not just talking teachers here, I'm talking all education workers, they're feeling it. We've basically, my favorite kind of quote from the president of Provincial OSSTF, Karen Littlewood, it kind of goes, we are already putting Band-Aids on the Band-Aids, and the parents are having to provide the Band-Aids as well. We're literally having to, in elementary classes, we are, asking parents to donate at the start of a school year, tissues, crayons, all kinds of different supplies. I know that our buildings, as much as our custodial staff is trying, they can't clean our buildings sufficiently enough. So there's these health and safety risks that are at play. School violence, and I'm not talking about bullies and that sort of thing that's always existed. I'm talking about school violence that has now reached almost an epidemic. And kids are kids. They're still the same as they've always been, but their needs have changed. And we do not have the ability to provide the special education resources that we should. And students are feeling that, and our staff are feeling that. We have education workers that have to wear Kevlar in order to, address student violent outbursts. Part of this maybe even stems from the cutting of the Ontario Autism Program. One of the first things the Ford government actually did when they took office. We now have a wait list for autism reports of 75,000 kids who, need those behavioral supports so that they can be successful in school. We have more situations with our early childhood educators with toileting issues because students are coming in and the self-regulation skills are just not there. So we've kind of reached this crisis point in public education, and we're feeling it. The burnout is quite real. We can't retain and recruit teachers or education workers. They're some of the lowest paid workers in the province. And despite, our pleads to say, every dollar you put into public education, you get about $1.30 back in total economic benefits. This was a study done by the Conference Board of Canada in 2019. We are seeing the funding being decreased. So the NDP, we want to, address things like the school repair backlog. 45% of the schools in the WRDSB are in need of repairs. We need to hire more staff. And I'm not talking teachers, I'm talking education workers to provide more of those one-on-one supports for those students so that they, get that right to an education. A comprehensive review of funding, because our funding formula is based on enrollment, not so much on, student needs, which is something we need to review. even creating a universal food program. And we have great supports here in Waterloo Region with reference to, food for kids and nutrition for learning. We're still waiting to see what happens with the federal program, but we know that kids learn best when they had their basic needs met. So that means we need to supplement this. And we need to have these safety measures put in place with reference to school violence so that not only our students feel safe, but our workers stay safe. So that's kind of where we are with reference to public education. Post-secondary institutions, that's a whole other thing that needs to be addressed. Conestoga College is in the riding of Kitchener South Hespeler. Colleges were never expected to provide housing. And so when we had an influx of international students, and that was due in part to, the tuition freeze, the lack of subsidies being provided by the provincial government to support funding for colleges and universities as well, it's created a bit of a crisis with reference to housing. 90% of students at Conestoga College have had to visit a food bank. So we need to invest in our colleges and universities as well to provide adequate funding, assist with housing, because, and I'm going to maybe go to that issue next, because it's important. Conestoga College is one of the, biggest, I'll even say employers in the entire region. And the education they provide students, the training they provide is going to be crucial for us as an economy moving forward, especially with reference to the trades. So there's an education funding shortfall both within the public education system and in the post-secondary institution that we need to address. I will go to housing next. It's a big issue that I am hearing, depending where I am in the riding. It's, again, Kitchener South Hespeler, for those of you who don't know, it's got both the city of Kitchener and the city of Cambridge in it. And the issues, some of them, there's some similarities. The housing one is a little bit different just because there are more rentals in Kitchener itself. And some of the stories I've heard from those who are tenants in apartment buildings have been quite alarming and heartbreaking. Rent control, we just don't have it. And it's absolutely crucial we do. I will hear from tenants who have been living in a building for a decade or more, their rent is reasonable. But if they have a building an apartment that comes up for rent in that same building, it's maybe 2 or 3 times as much. Rent evictions are a real thing that's happening in Kitchener and in Waterloo Region. And I was at the City of Kitchener Council meeting last week with those in Acorn, just trying to help where I could to assist them in getting a rent eviction bylaw passed. It is something that is on the Ontario NDP radar. Should we form government, we may need to do this provincially because it is happening province-wide. But we know sometimes governments, fall short on some of these promises, and there are things that the City of Kitchener can do in the interim to assist with this. It's a slow-moving process, but the Acorn Group, I've been so impressed with their lobbying, their just unrelentlessness with organizing, which is what you have to do. But the situations around rent control and rent evictions is something that we absolutely need to address. We do have, compared to most places now in the province, we do have more rental units, but they're not being filled because, again, the cost is so much. We also, in the Ontario NDP, we're going to go through our Homes Ontario plan where we are going to create more non-market housing. The government has not been involved in building homes since the 1990s. And I've talked to several construction workers over the past several weeks who've said they're not working, and it's because the costs have increased. And that's a great argument to have governments interject a little bit into the housing market to provide some low-cost financing, to provide social housing, especially for those that are in encampments. Deeply affordable homes, and we could argue about that, what affordable means, for another 25 minutes. But it's something that we have to be able to do, and we need to be able to build in places maybe that already exist. So, for example, the Southwest Kitchener portion of the riding is right now been open for development. The Ford government during Bill 162, the Getting It Done Act, opened up 6,000 acres of land for development. And in Southwest Kitchener, very environmentally sensitive land is going to be used for housing. The problem is it's on natural aquifers, and 80% of the region of Waterloo gets its water from the ground. So there's risk of contamination if we build over this. We may have to build a pipeline to Lake Erie to ensure the entire region gets water in the future. So to me, we need to be building in places that have already been developed. Hespeler, a great example, is along the Speed River, older factories that are there. That's where we need to build the housing. And they have a plan there in Hespeler where they're going to redevelop that to do so. That's what we need to do. Land that we can repurpose that's already been used. We can't keep reusing. We can't just keep destroying good fertile farmland. We're losing 300 acres of farmland a day. It's something that we need to be cautious of. So more middle housing, co-ops, sustainable homes, rent controls. That's kind of where we stand in the NDP with reference to that. I'm going to now go to public health care. A couple things. I like that the region, in the region of Waterloo, we have Grand River Hospital and St. Mary's General. They are merging. This is fantastic news. They do lots of, they kind of already work in tandem with one another. So to have that merger occur is going to be fantastic. And the new hospital build that's going to happen up in Waterloo, being connected to the university, is also a fantastic thing for the region. My only concern is I hope that it stays public. I'm a little concerned about this public-private, enterprises, which we've seen in healthcare for a while. The NDP, we take great pride with Tommy Douglas and getting a public healthcare system put in place. And we're seeing that also eroded under the Ford Conservative government. And hallway medicine had already begun during the previous Liberal government as well. So we need to invest. We're down $20 billion in overall spending in that sector as well. So it means getting creative. It means we have to invest in people, ensuring that we hire doctors and nurses. The nursing ratios are out of control. The fact that there is a triage nurse at Grand River Hospital that goes between the ambulances that cannot unload their patients is unacceptable. We need to be investing in that. And we need to have these team approaches as well. With reference to family doctors. My own family doctor is part of a team working down in Cambridge. It's fantastic. And I get it. You want a team approach because for years family doctors were burning out. And we have to be cognizant of all of those different things. But we have to invest. It's public health care is one of these things that I think we pride ourselves in as a nation. To hear that certain things are becoming privatized, such as cataract surgery, is unacceptable. And it is getting to the point where I'm hearing stories from people who are on wait lists for certain types of surgeries where they just go, you know what? I'm done waiting. I've got the money to pay for it. It's inequitable, it's wrong, and it's something we really need to change. We also need to really, I think part of the reason we have these wait lists with reference to our hospitals is because not only are we short 2.5 million Ontarians don't have a doctor. It's roughly 70,000 here in the region of Waterloo. But because of, legislated poverty for certain groups of our population who, rely on ODSP, which we will double, and as well as OW, people are having to make these difficult decisions between, do I buy medication? Do I get food for my family? Or do I pay my rent? And what's starting part of the cycle with reference to emergency rooms, with their long wait times, 10 hours or more, is people that have to make this choice are often choosing food for their family or their rent, but this life-saving, medication, causes them to get sick. Then they're in the ER because they don't have a family doctor, and this cycle just continues to percolate. We need to be investing in a healthy society. We need to be doing more preventative measures, not just these reactive things, which really do cost more in the long run. And if we invest in people, that's through education, that's through healthcare, that's through lifting everybody up out of poverty. That includes, again, finding people homes, those who are in encampments, ensuring that we have wraparound services in a team approach to help people with addictions and mental health issues. It's going to lead to better things in the long run. I'm looking down at my watch, realizing I have a few minutes left, so that leads me to go to the last area, which is tariffs and the cost of living. We don't know what's going to happen down south, but it does, and what those implications are going to be, but they definitely are kind of top in mind for the riding of Kitchener South Hespeler. 20% of people in that riding work in manufacturing, and we have some pretty substantial industries in the riding, and that's Toyota, the Loblaws Distribution Center. So we need to make sure that we invest not just in businesses who may be in peril, especially our auto sector, if tariffs do fully become implemented, but that also includes people. So that does include, ensuring that we have discussions with the federal government to have some sort of approach that if, unfortunately, if that gets to this, that people are laid off from their jobs, that we are able to provide some sort of stimulus to them, not just supporting businesses. We have to be able to do both. And we're also pretty blessed in having lots of different small businesses in this riding, which is fantastic, especially in Hespeler. Like, they are the drivers of our community. And so we have to be able to do those investments. Right now, I am hearing really good things from everybody, all political parties with reference to this. But one thing I will criticize with reference to the Ford government, I don't hear them saying they're going to invest in people with reference to their stimulus passages with the tariffs. I'm not hearing that whatsoever. And that's something I can definitely say the Ontario NDP will cover. Last thing, we are planning to do a grocery store rebate based on income and number of people in a household. Grocery prices are astronomical now. Perhaps one of the things that we may learn out of this, sort of existential threat with the tariffs is that we will increase our own food sovereignty, which will help and assist with decreasing those prices for food. But it's something that, I am really, really proud that this is something that we're putting forward because families are struggling with reference to this. They need to eat, but we also need to be able to invest in, community gardens, for example. I know we've got great groups here in Waterloo Region. We kind of have to start going this food sovereignty kind of route. And that's why, as much as, we want businesses here, and I look at the situation as Wilmot as an example, the process and the lack of transparency with those 770 acres being expropriated, it's a definitely, to me, that's problematic. We don't know what kinds of jobs that's going to even create there in that area, but it is the food sovereignty. Farmers are businesses, and they provide lots of things for people that we need. And when we only have 2% of our land being fertile enough to grow food for our population, it's something we need to consider. So all these sort of different issues kind of, they connect to one another, which makes, the problems very difficult. So Bob is coming back in the room. I've actually timed this perfectly. It's like I've done this before, but I've not. But I thank you all for your time today. I hope and really hope you consider us, the Ontario NDP, in the election happening on the February 27th. You can also reach me at jeff.donkersgoed at ontariondp.ca if you have any questions.
Thanks, Jeff. You've been listening to Jeff Donkersgoed, NDP candidate for Kitchener South Hespeler on Meet the Candidate. The views expressed were those of the candidate and not necessarily those of the Radio Waterloo Board of Directors, volunteers, sponsors, or advertisers. All Waterloo Region candidates were invited to meet the candidate, but some candidates have declined to appear on the radio and some have not responded at all. Meet the Candidate airs every weekday at 9 a.m. and 9:30 a.m. until Tuesday, the 25th of February 2025 on CKMS-FM 102.7 Radio Waterloo. Remember, the election is on Thursday, the 27th of February. Show notes, podcast, and video will be available shortly on the Radio Waterloo website at radiowaterloo.ca/MTC. The show is produced by me, Bob Jonkman, in the studios of CKMS-FM. The theme music is Falling Sky by Jason Shaw of Audionautics.com and used under Creative Commons Attribution Only 4.0 International License.